What's going on, everyone? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres. That's Mark Wang, and we are here to give you our final thoughts on Oregon's Week 2 win over the Eastern Washington Eagles. Man, Ducks come out with a win in a big fashion, blowout fashion, I might add, 70-14. Man, this was quite the game. First things first, though, Mark, how you living, man? Good to see you again.
Good to see you too, Max. Yeah, great to be out of that game, helping to work it, being up in the box. Always a fun time, and to get to go watch some Ducks football, and always a fun time to get to talk about it.
Absolutely. Well, we have a lot to talk about here. Definitely a little late getting this podcast recorded, but wanted to get my thoughts, get you guys our thoughts before we completely turn the page to BYU. Depending on when you're listening or watching this, Dan Lanning is scheduled to meet. All right, Mark, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you, yeah.
Okay, now I can't hear you. Give me a second. I think my mic cut out.
Yeah, you cut out for a second there.
Cool. All right, can you hear me now?
Yeah, can you hear me?
All right, we're good. I moved my cord ever so slightly, but we're good now. We're back. We're here to talk about the Ducks. I was saying that Dan Lanning meets with the reporters tonight. I think it's like 6:45, so pretty late. But we'll make sure to keep you guys up to date with the latest coverage there over on Ducks Digest. So kind of just wanted to get into our thoughts here, Mark. I think we definitely need to start with the quarterback and Bo Nix and how he looked. He was the first Oregon quarterback to throw for 5 touchdowns in a single game since Justin Herbert. So definitely in some elite company there. Final stat line for Bo Nix, 28 for 33, 277 yards, 5 touchdowns, and then perhaps the most important number of the night, no interceptions and no turnovers. What did you think about what you saw from Bo Nix?
He looked a lot more comfortable. He even said so after the game during post-game media availability. He said he felt more comfortable. Lanning also mentioned that like they tried going back to more of the basics, some more of the simple things during this last week in practice, which I think was a big part of Oregon just being able to remain calm, to move the ball, and to not try anything too complex or too major to help at least keep the game plan simple, so that they could move the ball, keep the ball, and score, which they did quite a lot, because 70 points isn't exactly easy to put up.
Yeah, they were super efficient on offense, and that was one of the questions that I had before this game was how effective and efficient are they going to be able to be on offense after just some crazy struggles in week 1 against Georgia. But as I think we can agree, a lot of people would say that pretty much everybody's going to struggle against Georgia. You know, they're definitely in that upper echelon, certainly looking like a top 4 playoff team in the country. I think they're actually the recent number 1 in the latest AP poll. But yeah, I think it was definitely a good game for Bo Nix. Needed to get some confidence under his belt. Good to get a win for him. Good for the Ducks to get a win in week 2 in their home opener in Eugene. It was a very smoky day. So I remember you and me were in the press box and we were saying, man, we're getting some ash on our laptops here. Definitely a pretty ugly game, just the setting. But Duck fans still showed out. They still tailgated. And, it's still a really good atmosphere in Addison overall. I think when we're kind of just going off of Bo Nix's performance, I don't want to move on from him too quickly, but the guys that he was throwing the ball to, they were having a really, really strong day. A couple of guys that we definitely have to hit on here are Troy Franklin and Terence Ferguson. Terence Ferguson only had 3 catches, but he had a pretty dominant showing. 3 catches for 35 yards and 2 touchdowns. He scored the first touchdown of the year for the Ducks. And then he had another one that I believe was actually on SportsCenter's top 10 plays, where he bobbled the ball up in the air after an Eastern Washington defender got a hand on it. And then he tracked it, and then he bulldozed over a couple of defenders on his way to scoring 6 points for Oregon. So, man, I loved what we saw to Terence Ferguson against Eastern.
Yeah, him and all the Oregon receivers and the whole offense really was just clicking on all cylinders. I really liked that Lanning and Dillingham had Bo Nix really spreading the ball around. He didn't really have like his one go-to guy that he was going to go to, but he got the ball into the hands of all different Ducks players, which is I think really important just to build that confidence for both the quarterback and the offense in general after that absolute shellacking from Georgia, where you couldn't move the ball, you didn't get into the end zone, and now to that very next week to basically flip the script around and go from getting blown out to blowing your opponent out. But yeah, Ferguson had a really good game. That whole offense really just had a really good game because they were all clicking.
Over 600 yards of total offense, Mark. 9 touchdowns from the Ducks offense against the Eagles. I've been really high on Terence Ferguson since he was a recruit. I mean, the way that he has transitioned to the college game has been really fun to watch because he really even got used as a receiver at times at the high school level, getting flexed out wide, moved all over the place. But he's a really good dual threat tight end. He's not just a blocker and he's not just a pass catcher. He carries his weight really, really well. I think he's, both he and Maliki are both 6'5", 6'6" in the 250 area, 250 range. And he's just really, really starting to come into his own. Saw a lot of playing time last year. Both he and Maliki did, which I think, speaks to the acumen of their game and how good they are as players. But the nice thing, too, for Oregon is that Terence Ferguson wasn't the only tight end that was making an impact in this game. A couple other guys got involved in that one. Maybe most notably is Cam McCormick. I mean, what a story for Cam McCormick. Been at Oregon what feels like forever. Had some really brutal injury luck during his time at the college level, but he's back healthy now. He scores a touchdown for the Ducks in that game, wearing Spencer Webb's number 18. Eastern Washington also put flowers out on the field for Spencer to honor him before the game. And it really just felt like, everything came together, and it was a pretty nice story to see Cam get in the end zone there.
Yeah, seeing McCormick get in the end zone after a lot of the injuries that he's had, a lot of struggles he's had, and then just seeing him do that and to honor Spencer Webb in that way was just really awesome. Was really awesome to see. I think even I was I know I was happy when he got in the end when he got in the end zone, as were all those fans in that stadium, and then. Yeah, really classy act by Eastern Washington, putting the flowers out right before the game, just to show their support for an Oregon program that has been hurting a lot since this summer, and this being that first game back in Autzen since Spencer Webb's passing, I know definitely had a special significance for the Oregon Ducks as well.
Yeah, Ducks are also wearing a special helmet decal, I believe. The 4 with a spider on it for the remainder of the 2022 season. So that's great that they're able to put out a really good effort and come away with a win against the Eagles. Just to touch a little bit more on the passing attack, I mean, the offensive line looked great. Ryan Walk didn't look like he was available in this one. So Marcus Harper got quite a bit of snaps after a pretty strong showing against Georgia in week 1. Even though the Ducks didn't get into the end zone, I thought he performed really, really well. And he had said as much, he was counting the days, over 1,000 days until he contributed. But as far as the offensive line, this one, you saw Marcus Harper play a lot. And then Jackson Powers Johnson was back in action after not playing against the Bulldogs in week 1. So Bo Nix was not sacked in this one. Really good performance by the offensive line, one that they definitely needed. And I don't think that they were bad against Georgia. It was just a rough day for them, especially with the turnovers that they battled early. It was kind of hard to get into a rhythm. But can we talk about Troy Franklin if we're going to talk about this offense? Because, man, have yourself a day, Troy Franklin. 10 catches for 84 yards and a touchdown. Was the first wide receiver since Johnny Johnson in 2019, I believe it was, to record 10 or more catches in a single game. And, I mean, it's only 2 weeks, but through 2 weeks here, Mark, it looks like Troy Franklin's kind of establishing himself, or at least making a pretty strong case as Bo Nix's go-to option, maybe even a wide receiver 1. What do you think?
I think you can absolutely make that argument. I'm looking at the stats. Troy Franklin was by and away the most efficient catcher for the Ducks, pass catcher for the Ducks, leading all receivers for the Oregon Ducks team. Heck, actually leading all receivers just period. 10 catches, like you said, 84 for a touchdown, including including the play with 14 seconds left in the half for Oregon to score and go into the locker room with already a big lead, and then Oregon just come back out and score and just continuing to absolutely pile it on. He was probably absolutely one of the key contributors for this Ducks team to really get that offense going.
Yeah, and he wasn't the only one that was, getting involved in the passing game there. I think it was also encouraging because he was able to show that, he's a physical guy, even though he's tried to put on weight throughout the offseason. I thought he did a really good job of battling through some tacklers. That is something good to see. And there were a bunch of different guys that recorded catches here. But I think Troy Franklin, after seeing him last year, a lot of his catches were, in the short area to intermediate. I think he's someone that can really establish himself as a good deep option, as well as Dante Thornton, who was second on the team with 4 receptions for 60 yards, had a long of 22 yards. Chase Cota got involved, Byron Carball got involved, Caleb Chapman, the A&M transfer, Josh Delgado, Chris Hudson. Just a really good day of distributing the rock for Bo Nix and some of the other quarterbacks, because a couple other Oregon quarterbacks were able to get in on the action in this game, which I think was a really good point that we can spend a little bit more time on. But I definitely thought we had to talk about Troy Franklin, just because he was just in his bag in that game, and really encouraging to see him continue to step up as the Ducks are kind of still rotating a lot of receivers in, and he's making his case that he's going to be there and be a consistent option for them.
Absolutely. Or I think for confidence sakes for both Bo Nix and for this whole Ducks team, somebody had to get out there and really start establishing himself. Maybe not quite yet as the number 1 wide receiver, but someone that Bo Nix can consistently be going to, so that they can open up the passing attack instead of just having to rely entirely on the run game. We might be getting into that a little bit later, because the running backs for Oregon absolutely went off in this game. But just seeing that Franklin was able to get Troy Franklin was able to get outlet to get so open, and being able to create that consistency for the Oregon Ducks was something that was really important. And then just being able to see not only Bo Nix's chemistry with the receivers, but also for the other 2 quarterbacks, Ty Thompson and Jay Butterfield, both of whom saw considerable action. And I don't know about you, but I think it's pretty telling for Ducks fans as well as the quarterbacks how loud of a reception Ty Thompson got when he ran out on the field in the third quarter. I knew that the Oregon fans at Autzen were going to be excited to see Ty Thompson. I didn't think it was going to be that loud, though, because it was pretty loud.
Yeah, I think you and I are in the same boat as far as, we were both a little surprised to see Bo Nix still in the game with how much, how big the margin, the lead was for Oregon. But if you were at Autzen, you definitely knew that Ty Thompson was coming in the game, because the whole crowd erupted in cheers. This was a moment that a lot of fans have been waiting for since the Alamo Bowl, when Oregon, was obviously not going to be able to hang around in that game against Oklahoma. And when I say obviously, I mean the game was kind of decided at that point. Not a whole lot of benefit of keeping Anthony Brown in that game. Then a lot of fans were upset that Ty Thompson didn't come in the Georgia game when that game was way out of reach against the Bulldogs. So I thought Ty looked good. The biggest thing I feel like with Ty is that dude just has a rocket. I mean, compared to Bo Nix, I just feel like there's so much. The ball looks so lively coming out of Ty's hands. It gets there in a hurry. Maybe we want to see him reading the defense a little bit faster, but that was so relieving to see, I think, from an Oregon perspective, because a lot of times last year and even earlier this year, some of the younger guys, particularly quarterback with Ty and Jay, haven't been able to get into the game. So for Dan Lane to show the confidence, and Kenny Dillingham and the rest of that staff to show the confidence, and Ty to get him some snaps is absolutely huge. And I think that it's only going to bode better for Oregon moving forward, because this was, I mean, I can't predict the future, Mark, but this was probably the last really reasonable chance they're going to have to get some of those younger guys in. And that was one of the notes that I had, kind of just big picture, was that a lot of young guys played in this game. A lot of true freshmen played in this game. We even saw Josh Connerly, the former 5-star offensive tackle, get into some passing sets and get some snaps under his belt in his Autzen debut. But yeah, we had to talk about the quarterbacks and just how great and refreshing it was to see some of those younger guys get some snaps in there that they really need, and I think will go a long way in their development.
Absolutely. I know a lot of fans were calling for Thompson to go in during that Georgia game, excuse me, and then to see him get the snaps in was really impressive. His Thompson's final stat line: 5 of 7 for 63 yards, the completion rating of 71, and a QBR of 147. So not too bad. It's not too bad for that limited action, and I think that's gonna put some hope for Oregon fans, just knowing that the QB position could be solid for after Bo Nix leaves, or should Ty Thompson need to come in more later in this season.
Yeah, so we're gonna get to the running backs here in a second, because we have to talk about the run game. It was a dominant showing there as well. But we got a couple folks here in the live chat. So if you guys are here watching live, definitely hop in the live chat, hop in the comments. Let me know what you guys think about this Eastern Washington game, how the Ducks fared, and then how you're feeling about the BYU matchup coming up here. We got Soccer Gauze says Harper did well against Eastern Washington. Huge confidence boost for that guy. And I'm not really that surprised to see Marcus Harper the second. We're not talking baseball here. Do well, because he was someone that the last staff really raved about quite a bit, and we saw him in that 2 deep on a week in and week out basis. So I think for him to do well is definitely good, just to show that you can kind of rotate some pieces in there on the offensive line. We also saw a lot of Dawson Jaramillo, who was a pretty strong piece for Oregon's offensive line last year. But I'm thinking that Duck fans probably want to see Ryan walk back ahead of that big matchup against BYU. You there, Mark?
Yeah, I'm there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know if you had anything to say about that one, about Harper.
Not really much to say now.
Okay, no worries. We got a couple more here, and then we'll talk about the running backs. Cascadia Surfrider said Ty looked good against a very inferior defense, but in the spring game against better competition looked bad. Hopefully he'll be ready for next year, because there will be a 5-star ready to roll next year. Yeah, I think that's kind of one of the points that I'm getting at, why a lot of these reps and a blowout game like this are so important, because you're only going to have so many opportunities to get them in a game unless Oregon can take care of business against some of these lesser Pac-12 teams down the road this season. And then Dante Moore comes in, probably going to be an early enrollee, winter of 2022, December, January kind of guy. And he's going to be hungry. He's squarely in the mix for the best quarterback in the country, right up there with Arch Manning, and as well as Malachi Nelson, a couple of guys that are, really the cream of the crop in this class. But yeah, I think that, Ty's showing in the spring game wasn't super encouraging, but to see him get some live reps against a team that wasn't Oregon, I thought that still was, an encouraging sight to see. And you got to just keep trying to get that guy reps, put these games away early, and then get some of your developmental guys in there. Anything to add on this one, Mark?
Yeah, I agree with all that. For Ty, that's a huge confidence boost for being able to get out there and get live reps in an actual game, not just in the spring game, which some do argue that's just basically a glorified scrimmage, pretty much. But you see him being able to get out there and to get those live reps in, which is so important. And to kind of add a little bit about Dante Moore with yes, he is a 5-star. Yes, he is a 5-star coming in. Yes, he is a good quarterback, with some ranking services having him as the number 1 quarterback over Arch Manning. But keep in mind also, college game and the high school game, 2 completely different animals. So while I agree Dante Moore will make that quarterback competition interesting, I do think Ty Thompson, barring anything crazy happening, I think would be the guy after Bo Nix. And then Dante Moore would take over after Ty.
Well, that's another interesting point that you bring up, Mark, because correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Bo has another year after this if he does want to use it because of everything that happened with COVID. Because he came in as 2019, played 2019, 2020, which didn't count, so 2021, then 2022. So that's 4, but really just 3 years in terms of eligibility. But I think for Oregon's sake, you probably just want Bo playing 1 season. So you can stop going into the transfer portal. I think that's not a good long-term solution for Oregon. Their roster isn't built that way like some of these other powerhouse programs are. So I just wanted to bring that point in there. Before we get to a break, how about we talk about the running backs? Because the running backs put on a show, 48 total carries for 263 yards as a team and 4 touchdowns. Sean Dollars led the way with 9 total carries. And it looks like a lot, one of the early talking points, at least here in the season, is that Oregon kind of looks like a running back by committee, to the fullest extent. 5 total running backs registered carries in this one. We didn't see any of Jordan James, so you would probably think that he might be a little bit dinged up after leading the team in carries last week against Georgia. But Marquise Irving was pretty much the feature back, led the team in rushing with 74 yards and a touchdown. And I think that I really liked what I saw from Marquise Irving, and then Noah Whittington as well, who had 8 carries. They have been raved about throughout the offseason, and the staff had told us in spring ball that they're in a fall camp that, they're willing to use multiple backs. And I don't think that they're going to, fall into this narrative of needing to have a number 1 back. Although I do kind of see it more down the line, kind of rotating into like a duo, 1-2 punch that we've maybe seen in the past at Oregon with a 3rd guy ready to go.
Yeah, I agree with that. I kind of mentioned this a little on my on the recap story, which is up on the Next Digest website. Just Oregon does have that running back committee. You don't have a Royce Freeman, a LaMichael James, something like that, but you do have guys that consistently came out and played really well. Like we said, Sean Dollars, 9 for 58, no touchdowns. Was at least attempts-wise the leading rusher. Marquise Irving, 8 for 74 with a touchdown. Noah Whittington, 8 for 29 and a touchdown. Let's see here, and then you have Kilohana Hassenritter with 7 for 37 and a TD. Cardwell had 7 for 48 and a TD. And yeah, you had these Oregon running backs showing up, rotating through, and really showing that you have that depth at the running back position to know that you're good in case somebody goes down, next man up, but also knowing that you have all those different options that you can go to.
Yeah, and Hassenritter had a really shifty touchdown, and he had some pretty good pop, in his runs against Eastern. And then Byron Cardwell, he had a touchdown through the air and on the ground. So it's been really cool to see him used more in the receiving game, because that wasn't something we saw a whole lot last year. Obviously, Travis Dye was, the main guy for Oregon there, and the main pass catcher out of the backfield. But yeah, it's interesting to see how well-rounded this running back room looks. Sean Dollars continues to look really, really solid. Got a really solid frame, especially coming back from that injury. That's what you want to see. One of the top all-purpose backs coming out of high school, and looks like he's determined to pick up right where he left off, and he wants to be right there in the mix. And he led the team in carries. So clearly, the staff definitely thinks pretty highly of him. I don't know why, but it kind of feels like it was a quiet 263 yards. Maybe just because I didn't know that was the actual number, but also because Bo Nix threw 5 touchdowns. So I think that's kind of what led the way as far as the offense goes, the conversation around the offense, what have you. So really good showing from the Oregon running backs. Going to continue to see them rotate in, but as we get more and more into Pac-12 play here with the last non-conference game, Mark, I'm going to be interested to see if we see as much flexibility, as much rotation from the running backs. This was kind of the conversation we were having about the offensive line last year, which was rotating a bunch of pieces under Cristobal and Mirabal. But now it looks like that's kind of trickled into the backfield a little bit. Just wanted to see if you had any more thoughts there on the running back before we get to break.
I think this game might be kind of one of the last ones that we would see a running back by committee look, and I think that maybe just depends on how guys are doing against this BYU team, because this BYU team is going to be, I think, a good challenge for Oregon. This is their last, I think, real good test to see what they can do versus non-conference before you get into Pac-12. Really, you could say the only real test that they would have a shot at winning, because I don't think anybody had Oregon beating Georgia. But I think, especially once you get into Pac-12 play, you're going to want to have that that consistency and that reliable guy to go to at the running back position, because as we all know, conference play brings out a whole different level play and a whole different sense of urgency, I think. So I think Oregon's going to really want to have some more of those maybe tightened up a little bit.
Yeah, and Lanning said that there's still room to grow and that there's still more things they want to tighten up on offense. He even said he wanted to have those 14 points back. We're about to get into some of our thoughts on the defense, but before we do that, we're going to take a quick break here on the Ducks Dish podcast. We got more Oregon football talk for you guys, breaking down the Eastern Washington win and giving some of our thoughts ahead of the big game against BYU this week. But stick around, and we'll be right back after this. All right, welcome back to the Ducks Dish podcast. I'm not Mark Wang. I'm Max Torres, talking with my guy Mark Wang. We were both on scene in Eugene at Addison Stadium for the 70-14 beatdown that the Ducks, handed the Eastern Washington Eagles. We just talked about offense and kind of some of our big thoughts there in the first half. Now we're going to switch and talk about some defense, but just to set the tone a little bit about how dominant of a showing this was. Oregon allowed just 87 passing yards, and that was the first time, Mark, that they held a team under 100 passing yards since 2017 against Wyoming, when the quarterback was Josh Allen, one of the most dominant quarterbacks in the NFL. So kind of just one of those stats that makes you rub your eyes a little bit, because I was really surprised that the Wyoming offense looked as bad as it did in that game when Oregon faced the Cowboys in Wyoming. And then so under 100 passing yards for the Oregon defense, and then 187 yards of total offense. The first time they've held an opponent under 200 yards since Washington State in 2021, which was definitely one of their best showings of last season, before the wheels kind of started to fall off with some matchups against Utah and Oklahoma, and then all the coaching search craziness. But yeah, I think overall, I'm just really excited about this defense. I think they could have had an even more dominant showing, which goes back to what Lanning was saying about wanting those 14 points back. But you forced 2 turnovers, both through the air, so that was good. That was definitely an encouraging sign. But I do feel like they should have gotten more pressure on the quarterback than they did, because finishing plays is going to be a big thing. I think that was actually a comment a little bit earlier in the show. But they got a pair of sacks, I believe. DJ Johnson and Keith Brown get in there to have a little bit of a party in the backfield. But pretty solid showing from the defense. But I do think they could have been even more dominant, even though the numbers suggest that it was a very strong performance.
Yeah, that was a really strong performance by the Ducks. 48 total. The defense totaled up 48 total tackles, 30 solos, 2 sacks, 2 tackles for a loss, 2 interceptions, and 1 forced fumble. No quarterback hit. Oh no, that is a bit misleading, actually. My bad. but yeah, like this Oregon defense showed up big after getting, quite frankly, exposed on national TV by Georgia the other week, and I think people kind of expected that, but maybe people didn't expect it to be that bad. Um, but the Oregon defense, I think, took that step to be able to, I think, the fans of the college football will redeem itself after what happened. And you're right, two sacks. That's not a lot by any stretch of the imagination. And you have, if I think if you're Oregon, you have to be more aggressive and get after those the opposing QBs, keep them off their feet, keep them on their toes, so that you can kind of force force the offense to have to change its game plan a little bit in order to be able to get that advantage, especially when you get later down the line. Impactful play, heck, even against BYU, because BYU is going to come out swinging. I believe they won a close one. I think it was 26-20 at the end of it, from what I heard. So if that's any indicator, BYU is going to come to play, especially on the road out here in Autzen.
Yeah, so 2 sacks. I was looking at the notes, and I think that Casey Rogers also got credited with one, but it wasn't showing up on ESPN, but it was in my Oregon notes. So that was just the second sack of his career. But Casey Rogers has stepped up big for Oregon, I think. Both him and Jordan Riley played a lot of snaps in both of these 2 opening weeks. Of course, the Ducks will be without Popo Amavai, it looks like, for the rest of the season with a foot injury. He had a successful surgery, but as of right now, Dan Lanning's telling us that it looks like he's going to be gone the entire season. So Oregon's transfer pieces are showing up in a big way. Obviously, in the trenches, those guys were very heavily involved in the Oregon's defensive effort. Also had Sam Taimani, who we have to talk about as well. But if we're talking about transfer pieces, Christian Gonzalez showed up in a big way, forcing a turnover, getting an interception on a long pass. There was some pressure created there, and I think that really allowed Oregon's secondary to play with a little bit more freedom and more confidence. A lot of pieces are still rotating in there, but I think that Christian Gonzalez in particular needed to have a big game, a bounce-back game for Oregon, because he and a bunch of other Oregon defenders, for that matter, were just really getting bullied, quite frankly, for most of that Georgia game. And Oregon's going to need Christian Gonzalez to be a big piece as, their lockdown corner. Really, I think he landed on Bruce Feldman's freak list, 6'2" guy with, some serious speed, which you can never have too much of in a secondary on a defense. That's something that Dan Lanning and Tosh Lupoi absolutely love. But really good to see Christian Gonzalez get an interception there and just kind of shake things up for the defense, because it was a really good performance overall. But I think that seeing the defense force 2 turnovers definitely made this feel like a better, more well-rounded win. And the tackling was a lot better too. We got to give some props there for the tackling. And that's back to what you were saying that Lanning hit on, doing simple better.
Yeah, speaking of that tackle number, I think I mentioned it a little earlier, 48 total tackles for this Oregon team. So lots of different guys getting involved. 5 guys with 3 tackles, and 9 different guys with 2 tackles on that Oregon team, really all getting involved. And kind of going off what you said, Max, there, just some of those guys having those big games after getting bullied around by that Georgia offense. Kind of like you mentioned, Christian Gonzalez actually had one solo tackle, and then that one interception that he returned for 11 yards. He actually helped set up Oregon with a short field to be able to score. But right at the beginning of the second quarter, intercepts Gunnar Talkington and brings it back to the Eastern Washington 44, and then allows the Ducks to go down the field and score. So, yeah, I think overall a great confidence booster for a defense for this defense. Is it by all means their ceiling? No, because you've got a lot better teams coming up to play, and I know Dan Lanning mentioned that it's like they're nowhere at the post game press conference. They're nowhere near they're nowhere near where they could be. The standard for Oregon, the standard is the standard, and they have a lot, and they do have a lot of work to do. And while he did see some things, kind of like concerns and things from that Georgia game and from that week of practice addressed, he says that they're not where they want to be, and they've still got a ways to go and some football to play.
Yeah, it was good to see Christian Gonzalez make a play after that interception. You got to get, you want to have a playmaker in the secondary. And I think that was one of the things that made Javon Holland and Verone McKinley so good, is that after they got interceptions, they were able to pick up some really good yards after that. And then Triquez Bridges got involved too, jumping the route. And then he almost had a pick six until he fumbled it at the 2-yard line, but Casey Rogers hopped on it in the end zone. So really good to see those takeaways from Oregon, but by no means a perfect performance at all. And Soccer Gods has another good comment here. Dear defense, if you get to the quarterback, put him in the dirt. BYU's quarterback is slippery, and then he will burn us if we don't finish the play and make the tackle. And that's one of the areas of growth that I think I really want to see from Oregon's defense throughout the season. Getting pressure and then getting results, I think, are two different things. And Oregon has not done a great job in the past, at least, the past season or so, of finishing the play and getting the quarterback down to the ground. And part of that has to do with not over pursuing. Part of that has to do with having the right guy on the field, having, just as good of an athlete as the opposition's quarterback. And the BYU quarterback is very solid when it comes to just being an overall well-rounded player. Guy has some legs to his game, no doubt about it. So I think that they're going to have to make sure they finish plays, don't over pursue, don't arm tackle, and really just look like a team that's fundamentally sound and ready to make some noise in the backfield.
Yeah, we saw a lot of the arm tackling, the bad tackling in that Georgia game. So I know that's absolutely one thing that Dan Lane is going to be hitting on over the rest of the season. I think, especially in this last week, and most likely in this next week with BYU's QB being a mobile threat, and I think being aggressive and getting these guys behind the line of scrimmage is important. In this Eastern Washington game, Oregon's defense had 5 tackles for a loss. Not no one guy getting more than just the one tackle for a loss. And I think if Oregon wants to be more aggressive, they have to really be able to get after opposing quarterbacks and running backs. And I think this BYU game will be a good chance for Oregon to see that.
Brian Erickson here, staying on the similar vein. I think we will need to pressure BYU's quarterback a lot more, but also being able to contain him too. He is more of a threat to run than any quarterback we have faced yet this year. Bringing up some of Jaron Hall's stats here, he ran for 307 yards on the ground last year on 62 carries, averaging almost 5 yards a pop. So he's absolutely going to be someone that the Ducks have to account for as much in the passing game as they do in the run game. So going to have to see, that discipline is going to come into play here for Oregon on their defensive front, on the front seven. Another interesting matchup that we're going to have to watch, actually, that someone mentioned here. Gerard says, let's hope our left D end has a career day lining up against Kingsley Suamatia at right tackle for BYU. Because I was watching that game and that late game against Baylor. And, BYU had a familiar face with Kingsley lining up, making an impact for them on their offensive line. So they're going to have some guys that Oregon's defensive line is going to have to, counter with. But I think, your combination of Riley and Taimani and Rogers and then Dorless and Sewell and Flo at linebacker, I think that they definitely match up really well with BYU's defensive line, offensive line. But cool note here from Gerard, seeing that Kingsley's going to be lining up across from Oregon this time, of course, being a native of Utah, entered the transfer portal and ended up on Kalani Sitake's squad for the 2022 season.
I think probably the biggest matchup that I think we're going to want to see in that case is, Oregon's defensive line against BYU's offensive line can Oregon's defensive line get through the power through the offensive line, get to the quarterback and kind of rattle him and not let him, one, use his legs, and number two, not completely burn Oregon's secondary, which I think is still in the hands of a lot of people, or in the minds of a lot of people, is still kind of the biggest concern for this or for this Oregon defense. So can Oregon's defensive line be able to get through BYU's offensive line to the quarterback?
Yeah, they're gonna have to get after Jaron Hall. Get some hits on him early is kind of what I think is always a good way to go. Mark, just kind of rattle him around, and let him know that nothing's gonna come easy. But they're also pretty good. They're also pretty good in the run game as well. So I think that BYU presents a very well-rounded matchup. A lot of capable guys. We're gonna have to see if Nakua and Romney are able to play. I think I saw someone comment that earlier on in the show. They were not available against Baylor. But Puka Nakua is a name that Oregon fans should definitely know very well, seeing that he was not only at Washington last year, but also someone that Oregon was going after when he was coming out of high school. So they have some very capable options there. I think one of the other notes that I had here, and maybe we can get to some of these comments, Mark, is just the young guys that were able to play on defense. We saw Keith Brown get a sack. He played a pretty decent amount last year because the Ducks were stretched pretty thin at linebacker. But Sir Mel's played. He had a pass deflection. Jaleel Florence and Jaleel Tucker both played. So I think it's just really good to get those guys involved early. And I think that some of them flashed just by, getting out there as true freshmen and then, showing that they were able to kind of, execute their assignments and also, level up to that physicality of the college game, even though it is against an FCS opponent. That was kind of one of the last things that I had to say before we get to some of these comments.
Yeah, you had guys like Darren Barkin's the freshman guy. What was it? I just had it. I just had that. That's not it. Yeah, he had one pass breakup and one solo tackle. Just being able to getting involved and contributing on one of three pass breakups for the Ducks to go along with those 2 interceptions, which is always a good thing, and just being able to continue to develop the secondary to hopefully a much more complete unit, and being able to see them also be set up well for the future going forward, because Oregon definitely has had its fair share of really good defenses like the last couple of years, and then not so great defenses, with a lot of people saying that the defense this year was, particularly the secondary, was one of Oregon's biggest liabilities.
And I think from an Oregon perspective, you're hoping that this year's unit can make sure that they're not a bend don't break defense. We want to be a dominant defense that is able to hold up and get big stops, and then also force turnovers. Because they forced a lot of turnovers last year, but they were almost turnover dependent in terms of just their big plays and staying in games and keeping opponents out of the end zone. So that's something that I think I want to see them grow on. One other guy that I think really standing out to me is Brian Addison. He's getting some pretty crucial snaps, important snaps, as the Ducks still kind of try to work out and fill out that defensive back rotation in the secondary. Dante Manning's getting a lot of run at corner, as is Triquez Bridges. So it seems like that safety spot is the one that's kind of the most flexible right now for Oregon. But Brian Addison is someone who's impressed me in the first 2 weeks, kind of just showing up, making some plays. Let's see. I was thinking we get to some of these comments, Mark, and then we'll wrap up from there. What do you think?
Yeah. Also, Addison having the only forced fumble of the game for the Ducks, weren't able to recover it, but he was able to get the ball loose.
Absolutely, yeah. He's stepping up to make plays when they need it. Another comment here from Cascadia Surfrider saying the defense must set the edge because Bennett torched us for multiple third and longs and is not as mobile as BYU's quarterback, so they better be ready for that, or it could be deja vu all over again. Yeah, I think that's absolutely something that's been a big focus for Oregon since week 1 against Georgia, like setting the edge and then setting on the edge on offense and defense. Lenny talked last week about blowing up blocks, block destruction, and then also breaking tackles. So they're going to need to set the edge on defense and on offense, because I think that BYU is going to be much more physical up front, much more experienced, much more productive than Eastern Washington. Eastern Washington had a couple guys here and there, but obviously Oregon made pretty quick work of them. So I think that I'm definitely in the vein of, there's definitely good things to take away from that Eastern Washington game, but at the end of the day, you're beating up on an FCS team, so you can't make too much of it.
Yeah, just beating up on an FCS team, can it be a confidence booster? Yes, but I think the biggest test post Georgia and pre Pac-12 play, obviously, is going to be this BYU team. And I think if Oregon can't set the edge on offense, then it could be a long day for Bo Nix back there, because if Bo Nix gets rattles, it could end up looking more like that Georgia game did, and then just being able to set the edge on that defense. For Oregon, you have to be aggressive. You have to have more than, I think, two sacks and 5 tackles. Sorry, 2 sacks and 5 tackles for a loss. If you want to be able to win some more of these big football games. Oregon hosts Utah later this year, and I know definitely if they want a chance to win that game, they're going to have to be aggressive. For Oregon's sake, they need to start now.
Absolutely, they do. They're looking to take the momentum from this game and carry it over into BYU, and then that doesn't get that much easier after BYU, because Washington State just upset Wisconsin. They have to go on the road to the Palouse to start off Pac-12 play. Last question here from Christopher that I wanted to get into. Mark, you can give your take on this too, but Christopher says, Max, what's more likely, Ducks cause 2+ turnovers or Ducks commit 5+ penalties? Well, let me see. I think I want to look at the team stats here in the BYU, or sorry, the Wazoo, the Eastern Washington game, to see how many penalties they had, because they had 6 penalties for 55 yards. But we also know how it gets harder to play clean games and you're playing against tough opponents. So, oh man, Mark, when you read this, do you read this as more than 2 turnovers or 2 or more?
I read it as 2 or more. 2 or more. And in that case, I almost have to say it's more likely to commit the 5+ penalties. Oregon had some close calls. I forget who it was, but I know somebody got ejected for targeting that last game.
I think that was on the kickoff.
Did. Yeah,
and then Leduc almost did.
Yep, Leduc almost did. So I think just that, plus the fact that didn't necessarily play the cleanest game against Georgia, and you're right, when you're playing a gritty team, especially a team that's got something to prove, you've got to be careful. And if Oregon's not if Oregon's not as aggressive as they need to be, they're not going to get, I think, really any turnovers. But I do think they are more likely to commit the 5+ penalties.
Yeah, so after talking about it more, I'm going to say commit 5+ penalties, just because we did see some penalties against a pretty inferior opponent, even though it was a pretty dominant showing. And I think we haven't seen them force a lot of turnovers or against a good team yet, because they didn't force any turnovers against Georgia, but they were able to force turnovers against Eastern Washington. So I think right now, based off of what we've seen in the on-field product, I'm going to go with the latter. I think it's more likely that the Ducks commit 5+ penalties, but I'm hoping they prove me wrong in this one. But yeah, Mark, any final thoughts here before we get out of here on this episode?
Yeah, I actually just found the penalties breakdown. Oregon's offense had 5 accepted penalties for 40 yards and 1 accepted for 15 on the defense. So that's 6 already, right? So that's 6 already right there. So definitely already over the 5+ penalties. And if that's against a FCS opponent, that could potentially be an indicator for against a BYU team, but who knows?
All right, yeah. So we'll see if they can clean things up on the penalty front in this next game against BYU. But overall, final thoughts from me. I think that Oregon played a pretty good game against Eastern Washington. I don't want to make too much of it because it was an FCS team, but you love to see the offense firing on all cylinders like that. Great confidence booster for Bo Nix. Playing like a veteran who has as much starting experience as he does at an SEC school. And then you like to see the young guys also contributing on offense. Really like what we saw from the running backs in terms of just a lot of different people contributing, and the tight ends getting used. That was awesome. But need to see more pressure from that defensive front, because I think that was an underwhelming result in that category. But in terms of this BYU game, going to be interesting to see what Dan Lanning and the players have to say this week. I think you definitely head into this game with more confidence than you were feeling after the Georgia game. But there's still a lot of work to do, and I think that this game will ultimately kind of decide how things are looking for Oregon and their chances to get back to that Pac-12 championship game and maybe even bring it home in 22.
I agree with that. This is the big game at this point in Oregon season. It's your last non-conference game. It's against a good non-conference opponent, and it's the one non-conference big game that you have the chance of winning. That you actually have the chance of winning. Because again, I'm not trying to blast Oregon in this way, but I don't think anybody really had them winning against Georgia. So for Oregon, this is the game where you need to step up and see and show what you are made of if you want to have a chance to go up and win against teams like a Utah, who you have on the schedule this year, a USC, who you would most likely be playing in the Pac-12 title game at this point, because right now USC is the class of the Pac-12, bar none.
Yeah, USC is looking pretty solid. I actually gave some pretty in-depth thoughts on their big win over Stanford to open Pac-12 play under Lincoln Riley. That is in the process of being uploaded for the Pac-12 Takeover podcast over on Takeover Sports Network. So if you guys haven't checked that out, I also have a Pac-12 podcast. Before we get out of here, Mark, where can people find more of you, whether it be social media or your written stuff?
Yeah, social media, Mark W 2016, as it says on the tape or on the ticker right there. And then also check out some of the stuff here on the Ducks Digest page. I had the story on the breakdown from the game, and then working on getting some more stuff up hopefully soon.
All right on. Make sure you guys tap in with Mark. If you want to find more of me, you can follow me on Twitter right there at mtorresports. And you can also find all my written content. Had an update with 5-star defensive end / edge rusher Mateo Uyunglele. That's the most recent recruiting story over on Ducks Digest. So you definitely want to see what's going on there. Huge target for Oregon. Dan Lanning, Tosh Lapoy, the whole squad. And then you can also find me on YouTube. If you guys are here watching live still, take a second out of your day, smash the like button, smash the subscribe button. It is a tremendous help to what we're doing here. And then last favor to ask, if you guys share the Ducks Dish podcast with your friends, family, and other Duck fans. It's just been a blast growing this and looking to keep it going strong. So that'll do it for us here on the latest episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. Thank you guys for tuning in. Thanks to Mark for hopping in on short notice. Always great to chop it up with you, man. And we will see you guys on the next episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. Take care.